This flag comes down by Friday, or the fines start, and they do not stop. That was Brenda Coyle, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing on my driveway in a coral blazer and white sneakers that had never seen a day of work, pointing at the pole my late wife and I had set in concrete the summer before she died. The flag was a plain field flag, the kind you buy at the hardware store, on a pole I had permitted, inspected, and signed off on myself. Brenda did not know that. Brenda did not know a lot of things, and the one she should have checked before she ever knocked on my door was the name printed at the bottom of every building permit her husband's company had ever pulled in this county. My name. For 26 years, I'm going to tell you what she did to me and what I did back. And I want you to ask yourself one thing as we go. If you had spent your whole working life signing the paper that let other people build, and someone came to your home and told you that you needed their permission to fly a flag on your own deeded land, what would you have done? Hold that thought. I held mine for a long time. My name is Walter Hale. I was 63 years old when this started, a widower. And for most of my life, I was the building official for this county. I read plans. I checked setbacks against the recorded plat. I walked footings before the concrete trucks came, and I signed the permits that said, yes, this meets code, or no, it does not. Fix it. I retired the spring after my wife Diane passed. We had bought our 3 acres on the edge of what was then open pasture back in the 90s. Long before Cedar Hollow existed, long before Brenda Coyle and her husband ever drew a line on a map and called it a community. That is the part that matters, so I will say it plainly now and let it sit. My land was never part of the HOA. It predates the subdivision by 20 years. The developer platted around me. There is a recorded survey that shows my parcel notched out of the whole arrangement, like a bite taken from a cookie. And I have a copy of it. And so does the county. And so if he had ever bothered to read his own filings, did Brenda's husband. I knew this the way I knew my own hands. I had stamped the plat that created Cedar Hollow. I had written the conditions of approval. I knew where every easement ran and why. Knowing a thing and proving it on a Tuesday afternoon to a woman in a coral blazer are 2 different acts, though. And I'm a patient man, so I built my proof the way I had built everything else, slowly, on paper. Let me back up to the flag. Diane and I put that pole in the August before the cancer took her. She had wanted it for years. Her father had been a county road foreman, a flagman in the literal sense before the orange signs and the radios, and she liked the idea of one standing at the end of our drive where the wind came down off the ridge clean. We mixed the concrete ourselves in a wheelbarrow. I pulled a permit for it even though, on my own land, for a flagpole under 30 feet, I did not strictly need one. Old habit. I wanted it on the record. I wanted it correct. We set the pole on a Saturday, and she sat in a lawn chair with a glass of iced tea and told me it was 3 degrees off plumb. And she was right, and I reset it. That was the last big thing we did together outside. So when Brenda Coyle stood on my driveway 11 months later and called my flag a violation of the community aesthetic standards, she was talking about the last thing my wife and I built with our hands, and she did not know that either, and I did not tell her. I have learned that people who lead with a threat are not interested in your grief. They are interested in your compliance. The first letter came on a Monday. I remember because the mail ran late, and I read it standing at the box with the ridge behind me, going gold. Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, the letterhead said, in a font somebody had paid a designer for. Notice of covenant violation. It cited an article and section of the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, and it informed me that my flagpole and flag were out of compliance with the approved fixture schedule and that I had 14 days to remove them or face a fine of $50 per day. I read it twice. Then I did the thing I had done every working day for 26 years. I started a folder, a plain manila folder, labeled in pencil, Cedar Hollow. I put the letter in it, and I wrote the date on the outside, and I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning and pulled a certified copy of my own deed and the recorded plat of Cedar Hollow. And I put those in the folder too. The plat showed my parcel outside the subdivision boundary, plain as the nose on your face. I was not a member of the association. I had never signed the covenants. No one can bind your land to an agreement you were not party to, and that predates the agreement by 20 years. I wrote Brenda a letter back, 1 page. I was polite. I told her my parcel was not within the platted boundary of Cedar Hollow, that I had enclosed a copy of the recorded plat for her reference, and that I would be happy to discuss it, but that no covenant of her association applied to my property. I mailed it certified. I kept the green card when it came back. Signed, a reasonable person reads the plat, sees the notch, and says, "My mistake. Have a good day." Brenda Coyle was not interested in the plat, though. The plat was an inconvenience. What she was interested in, I would learn, was the strip of frontage my 3 acres sat on, because that frontage was the only flat, buildable access to the back 40 acres her husband's company had quietly optioned the year before, and a flagpole was never really the point. I did not know that yet. In that first month, I thought I was dealing with a busybody. That was my mistake, and I want you to learn from it, so I will name it now and come back to it. I underestimated her because I read her as petty, and petty people who are also greedy are the most dangerous kind. They will burn down a great deal to win a small thing, and call it principle the whole way down. The second letter came 2 weeks later. It did not mention the plat. It restated the violation, added the accrued fines, now $700, and informed me that a hearing before the Architectural Review Committee had been scheduled, and that my continued non-compliance was being documented. I added it to the folder. I drove out one Saturday and took photographs of the boundary, of the survey pins my old colleague had set decades back, of the flag in the morning light. I saved them to a drive, and then I saved them to a second drive because one copy is no copy, a thing I had told 100 contractors over the years. Then the fake inspector showed up. It was a Thursday, mid-morning. A man in a polo shirt and khakis, with a clipboard and a laminated badge on a lanyard, walked up my drive and announced he was there to perform a compliance inspection of the structure. I asked him what agency he was with. He said the Cedar Hollow Architectural Standards Office. I had spent my whole career around real inspectors and real badges, and I knew a costume when I saw one. The county does not have an architectural standards office. No municipality does. He had a badge ordered off the internet and a clipboard with a form somebody had run off at a copy shop. "You can stand at the property line," I told him. "You are not coming onto my land." He took a half step anyway, the way men do when they have decided in advance that you will fold. And I did not move, and I did not raise my voice, and that stopped him better than a shout would have. He got about a third of the way up the drive and held there, glancing back at his car once like. A man checking that the door was still where he left it, he clicked his pen against the clipboard. "Hi." He asked if I understood that obstruction of a compliance officer carried penalties. I told him there was no such thing as a compliance officer for a club I did not belong to, and that he was standing on a county road easement, and that the moment his shoe touched my gravel, he would be trespassing, and that I had a camera. He took some photographs from where he stood, fast ones, the kind you take when you have already lost the nerve for the errand, and he left. I photographed him, photographing me. I noted the time, the date, the make of the car, and the plate, which traced back when my friend at the sheriff's office ran it as a favor to a property management LLC. The same LLC, it turned out, that managed the Cedar Hollow common areas. The same LLC whose registered agent was Brenda Coyle's husband, Dale. That was the first thread that pulled. I wrote it in the folder. Incident 3. A man impersonating a public inspector on private land. Dispatched by an entity controlled by the developer. By then it was spring. The anniversary of Diane's death came and went. My daughter drove up from the city for the weekend. Her name is June. She was 19 that year, in her second year of community college. Studying to be a paralegal, which I want you to remember because it matters later, though not the way you would guess. June had her mother's flat, steady way of looking at a problem. She came up the drive, saw the second notice on the kitchen table, where I had left it before filing it, and read it standing up with her coat still on. "They fined you for the flag," she said. "Not a question. They did. The flag you and Mom set, that one." She put the letter down very carefully, the way you set down something you do not trust yourself to hold. "What are you going to do?" "What I always do," I said. "Write it down, keep the records, let them dig the hole." June did not think that was enough. She was 19 and she wanted to fight. And I understood that, except I had learned a long time ago that the loudest person in a dispute is usually the one with the weakest paper. I told her that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person who is bluffing is to be quiet and correct, and let them keep talking. I told her the file was the fight. She did not fully believe me. Even so, she started helping me keep it. And that, more than anything, is how she and I got through that year together. Two people at a kitchen table, sorting paper under the light. The way she and her mother used to do homework. The fines kept climbing. By midsummer, the association's ledger, which they helpfully mailed me every month like clockwork, showed I owed $2,100. I did not pay a cent of it. There was nothing to pay. You cannot owe a fine to a club you do not belong to for breaking a rule that does not apply to your land. The number on the page kept getting bigger, though, and that number, I would come to understand, was not really meant to be collected. It was meant to become a lien, and a lien on my frontage was the whole point. Here is where I have to tell you about the road. The back 40 acres behind Cedar Hollow had been landlocked for as long as anyone could remember. Beautiful ground, a meadow that ran up to the tree line, but no legal access. The only way to build it out, to run a road and utilities to it, and turn it into the next phase of the subdivision, was across a strip of flat frontage. And the only flat frontage in the right place was the southern edge of my 3 acres. Dale Coyle's company had optioned the back 40 for a song precisely because it was landlocked. If they could get access across my parcel, that land would be worth 10 times what they paid. If they could not, it was worth almost nothing. They had 2 ways to get my frontage. They could buy it from me, and they never asked, not once, because asking would have meant admitting they needed it. And Brenda Coyle did not ask for things she believed she was owed. Or they could take it through fines and liens and a forced sale, dressed up as covenant enforcement, so that when the dust settled it would look like a deadbeat homeowner, losing his place to his own association, rather than a developer stealing a road. I did not assemble all of this at once. It came in pieces the way the truth usually does. Over months, a county friend mentioned the option on the back 40. A title search I ran on my own dime showed the LLC's interest. A neighbor inside Cedar Hollow, a retired schoolteacher named Marcy who lived 2 streets in and had her own grievances with Brenda, told me over coffee that the board had been told the next phase would raise everyone's property values and that Brenda had promised it at 3 straight meetings. I wrote all of it in the folder. I did not act on any of it. I was waiting, and I knew exactly what I was waiting for. What I was waiting for was for Brenda Coyle to put it in writing, in a public meeting, on the record, that my land was part of her jurisdiction. Because the moment she did that in front of witnesses, the moment she committed fully to a claim she could not back up, the plat I had stamped 20 years before would do all the work I would never have to do with my own mouth. She gave me the first piece that summer. It was a Tuesday evening, the regular monthly meeting of the Cedar Hollow Board held in the clubhouse. The meetings were open to members, and while I was not a member, no one stopped me at the door, and I sat in the back row with my folder on my knees and said nothing. The room smelled of burnt coffee from the urn in the corner. Brenda ran the meeting from a folding table at the front with a gavel she had bought herself, a real one, walnut and brass, and she used it more than any meeting that Small ever needed. There were maybe 30 residents in folding chairs, and Marcy, 2 rows ahead of me, with a spiral notebook of her own, because Marcy had started keeping records too by then, though I did not yet know it. When they got to old business, Brenda brought up by lot number the ongoing violation at the property on the south edge, and she did not say my name. She said the property the way you talk about a thing rather than a man. And she said, and I wrote it down word for word as she said it, that parcel is functionally part of this community, whether the gentleman likes it or not, and we will be enforcing our standards on it accordingly. Functionally part of this community. I underlined it twice. 30 or so neighbors heard her say it. Marcy heard her say it. I did not stand up. I did not correct her. I let her have it, because a claim said out loud in a public meeting is worth 10 times a claim made in a letter, and I wanted as many of those as she was willing to give me. She was willing to give me a great many. That fall the escalation widened, the way these things always do when the small pressure does not work. The fines were not moving me, so they tried the people around me. I did a little woodworking out of my shop, custom furniture mostly for folks who found me by word of mouth, a retirement hobby that paid for itself. A few of my customers started getting calls, anonymous at first, then less so. A woman who had ordered a dining table for her daughter's wedding got a call telling her the man she was buying from was operating an illegal business in a residential zone and was about to lose his property to fines. Her name was Paula. She called me on a Sunday afternoon, near tears, the wedding 3 weeks out, and the table half built in my shop, and she asked me straight out if I was about to go under, because she could not afford to lose the deposit, and she could not afford to lose the table. I told her to come see for herself. She drove out the next morning and stood in my shop with her arms crossed while I showed her the table, the oak tops sanded to glass. Her daughter's initials I had agreed to carve into the underside where only family would ever find them. I showed her the deed in the folder and the plat with the notch. I told her plainly that I owned my land free and clear, that the calls she was getting came from people who wanted my frontage and not her business, and that her table would be at the reception on time. It was. She paid me cash and shook my hand and apologized twice, and I told her she had nothing to be sorry for, that the apology belonged to the people making the calls. I wrote it in the folder, incident 11. The phone call to Paula, dated with her name and the date of the wedding, because a harassed customer who is willing to say so out loud is worth more than any notice the association ever mailed me. The harassment of customers ran from incident 11 through 14 across 6 weeks, and 3 of those 4 were willing, when the time came, to put their names to what had happened. Then they came for the gate. I had a simple farm gate across my drive. The kind everybody out here has, a tube steel gate on a post. One morning in October, I came out to find a notice, zip-tied to it. An official-looking placard, red and white, declaring the structure in violation and ordering it removed. It was not from the county. This was another costume. The part that stopped me cold was lower on the gate, though where someone had cut the chain and replaced my padlock with one of their own. They had locked me out of my own drive, or tried to. I stood there a long moment, looking at that strange brass lock hanging where mine should have been, and I felt the old anger come up the back of my neck the way heat comes off an engine, and I let it sit there, and I did not touch the gate yet. First, I went to the truck for the camera. A man who is angry breaks things. A man who is keeping a record photographs them first. I keep bolt cutters in the truck the way some men keep jumper cables. And after the camera, I cut their lock off and put 2 of my own back on, and I photographed every step of it. The cut chain coiled in the gravel, their lock in my palm, the placard with its fake agency name, the post, the drive, the whole of it from 4 angles. In the clean October light. Then I drove the lock and the placard straight to a drawer in my shop and labeled the drawer with the date, because a thing you can hold in your hand is worth 100 things you only remember. That was the day the thing turned. Up to that point, it had been paper and posturing. Cutting a man's lock and putting your own on his gate is not posturing. That is theft of access. And depending on how a prosecutor feels that morning, it is a couple of other things too. I did not call the sheriff to make an arrest. I called my friend there, the one who had run the plate, and I asked him to come take a report, just a report. On the record, an incident number so it existed in the county system, and not only in my folder. His name was Tom, a sergeant, a man I had known for 20 years and watched come up from a green deputy. He came out that afternoon, looked at the cut chain, looked at their lock, looked at the placard with the fake agency name, and he got quiet in the way careful men get quiet when they realize a nuisance has become a crime. "Walt," he said, "I have to tell you something you already know. When somebody files a complaint, even a junk complaint, we have to roll on it. We do not get to decide it is junk before we look. So if she has been calling us about your business, your gate, your flag, those calls exist, and on paper it looks like a dispute with 2 sides." "I know how it looks," I said. "What you want," Tom said, "is a documented pattern. You want it so clear that when it lands on a desk, the desk does not have to think. How many incidents you got written down?" "Counting today," I said. 19. He looked at the folder, on my tailgate, the tabs, the dates, the photographs in their sleeves, and something in his face settled. "Keep going," he said. "Get me past 20 with the lock and the badge, and you have got more than a dispute. You have got a course of conduct." He wrote his report. He gave me the incident number. I put it in the folder. Incident 19, and the first one with a county case number attached to it, which meant the next time anyone pulled the history, my version and Brenda's version would no longer be 2 stories. There would be a record, and the record would be mine. I want to step out of the story for one moment, because this is the part people skip. Tom did not save me. The badge did not save me. The folder saved me, and the folder was just me, every Sunday night for 2 years, sitting at the kitchen table, writing down what happened that week while it was still fresh, dating it, filing it. If you take one thing from this, take that. Now, back to it. A lawsuit came in November. Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association versus Walter Hale filed in county court, seeking to foreclose a lien for unpaid fines that by then totaled $4,300, plus their attorney fees, plus a request that the court compel removal of the flagpole and the gate. It was a serious-looking document, with a real case number and a real attorney's name on it, a man named Pruitt, who did collections work for half the associations in the county. June drove up the day I got served. She read the complaint at the kitchen table the way she read everything, slowly, with a pencil. And when she finished, she looked up and said the smartest thing anyone said to me that whole year. "Dad," she said, "they have to prove your land is part of the HOA before they can foreclose a lien against it. They have to prove it in writing to a judge." "They do," I said. "And it isn't." "No," I said. She set the pencil down. "Then they just sued themselves," she said. And for the first time in months I laughed, a real one, because she was exactly right, and she had seen it in 20 minutes with a pencil. And I knew then that her mother's clear eyes had landed in her. What Brenda Coyle had done, in her certainty, was take her unprovable claim out of the letters and the meetings, where it could live forever on bluff, and file it in a court where bluff dies. To foreclose the lien, she would have to stand in front of a judge and prove that my parcel was subject to her covenants, and to prove that she would have to put the recorded plat in front of the court. The same plat that notched my land out, the same plat I had stamped. She was going to walk into a public courtroom and hand the judge the exact document that ended her case, because she had never once read it. I hired a lawyer, a calm older woman named Ruth, who had done real estate work in the county for 30 years, and who, when I laid the folder open on her desk, went through it page by page without saying much, and at the end took off her glasses and said, "Mr. Hale, in 30 years, I have rarely seen a file this clean from a person who was not a lawyer. What did you do for a living?" "I signed their permits," I said. "All of them, for 26 years. Does she know that?" "No," I said. "She never asked." Ruth smiled, a small, dry smile, and said we would not be telling her. We would let it come out where it would do the most good, which was in open court, on the record, in front of everyone Brenda Coyle had ever stood in front of, and called my home functionally part of her community. The hearing was set for a Wednesday in January. I need to tell you about the night before, because June was there, and because it is the part I keep when I think about that whole long year. We sat at the kitchen table, the folder between us, gone now from one manila folder to a banker's box with hanging files. Every incident tabbed and dated 2 years of Sunday nights. June had organized the exhibits for Ruth, numbered them, cross-referenced them to the timeline, work that a first-year paralegal would have been proud of. She had her mother's handwriting. Around 11, she capped her pen and looked at the box and then at me. "Mom would have liked this part," she said, "the part where you're right and you wrote it all down." "She is the one who taught me to write it down," I said, which was true. Diane balanced the checkbook to the penny and saved every receipt in a shoebox, and used to say that the truth was just facts that somebody bothered to keep. I had married a woman who kept the truth in a shoebox, and I had raised a daughter who numbered the exhibits. And I was about to watch a woman in a coral blazer lose everything she had reached for, because she never kept anything at all. We were in our seats by 8:30 the next morning. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Word had gone around Cedar Hollow. Marcy was there, and a dozen others from the subdivision. The misled neighbors, the ones who had been told for 3 years that the next phase would lift all their values, sitting on the hard benches to see how it came out. Brenda Coyle sat at the plaintiff's table beside Pruitt in a fresh coral blazer, and beside her, for the first time in the whole affair, sat Dale Coyle, her husband, the developer, in a sport coat, looking at his phone. They had brought their certainty with them. They had not brought the one thing that mattered. Pruitt went first. He laid out the fines, the notices, the ledger, the lien, the non-compliance, and he asked the court to enforce the lien and order the structures removed. He spoke for 20 minutes. He was good at his job. And then, because he had to, because there is no foreclosing a lien without it, he handed up to the bench a copy of the recorded plat of Cedar Hollow to establish that my property. He handed the judge the document that ended his case. He just did not know it yet, because he had been handed it by a client who had never read it. When Ruth's turn came, she did not raise her voice. She walked to the bench and asked the court to look at the plat the plaintiff had just submitted, at the southern boundary, at the parcel notched out of it, the parcel that bore my name and a deed recorded 2 decades before Cedar Hollow existed. She laid my certified deed beside it. She laid the original conditions of approval beside that, the document that created the subdivision, and she asked the court to note the signature at the bottom, the county building official who had stamped the plat into existence. Then she said the only dramatic thing she said all day, and she said it quietly. Your Honor, the building official who signed the plat that the plaintiff is asking this court to enforce the document that defines the boundary they claim my client's land falls inside, is my client. He notched his own parcel out of their subdivision before their subdivision existed. They have spent 2 years and over $4,000 in fines trying to enforce a boundary that he drew against the one piece of land he deliberately left outside it. The courtroom did the thing courtrooms do. A sound that is not quite a sound, a shift of 30 bodies on hard wood. I was watching Brenda Coyle's face. I will not pretend I did not want to see it. She turned to Pruitt and said something I could not hear, and Pruitt was already looking down at the plat in his hands, at the notch, at the name, and his shoulders had come down an inch, which in a collections lawyer is the equivalent of a man sitting down in the road. The judge looked at the plat for a long time. He looked at the deed, he looked at me, and then at Brenda, and he set the papers down. Counsel, he said to Pruitt, is your client aware that the parcel is platted outside the subdivision boundary? Pruitt said he would need a moment to confer with his client. He did not get a useful moment. Brenda Coyle stood up at the plaintiff's table, uninvited, and said in the same voice she had used on my driveway 2 years before, that the parcel was functionally part of the community, regardless of the plat. And the judge let her finish and then said the truest, plainest thing said in that room all day. Ma'am, there is no such thing as functionally. There is the recorded boundary, or there is not. This plat says your association's authority stops at this line, and his land is on the other side of it. I am dismissing the foreclosure with prejudice. The lien is void. The fines are void. They were always void, with prejudice. That means it cannot be brought again. $4,300 in fines, 0 of it ever owed, 0 of it ever collected, against a deed recorded 20 years before her covenants, and a plat that her own lawyer handed the court. Those are the 2 numbers I want you to hold side by side. $4,300 she tried to take. $0 she had any right to. The gap between those two numbers is the whole story. The dismissal was only the personal half, though the other half fell on its own, the way these things do when greed overreaches its paper. Here's the part Brenda Coyle never saw coming, because she was so busy looking at my frontage that she never looked at her own filings. The reason she needed my land was the road to the back 40. The reason the road mattered was the next phase. And the next phase, it turned out, had been sold to her own board and to the lender, on the strength of a representation that access was secured. When the foreclosure failed in open court, in front of Marcy and a dozen other members, it became a matter of public record that access was not secured, had never been secured, and could not be secured without my consent. The lender pulled the financing on the next phase within the month. The option on the back 40, the landlocked 40, that was worth 10 times its price only if a road could cross my frontage, expired worthless, and Dale Coyle's company ate the option money and the carrying costs and the engineering they had already paid for a phase that would never break ground. The thing Brenda had reached across my property line to grab turned out to be the thing that pulled her own scheme into the open and drowned it. She had demanded access to my land. The flood of that demand fell on her own development. And it did not stop there, though I take no pleasure in the next part, and I will tell it plainly and move on. The misled neighbors of Cedar Hollow, the ones who had been promised rising values for 3 years, learned in that courtroom that their president had spent association money, their dues, $4,000 in legal fees, on a foreclosure she had no basis to file, to grease a private deal her husband stood to profit from. Marcy and a handful of others requested the association's financial records, which under the declaration they had every right to see, and what those records showed led to a special meeting and a vote, and the end of Brenda Coyle's 9 years as president. She was not just defeated. She was removed by the very people she had spent those years lording the gavel over, for spending their money on her husband's road. The seat she had used to come at me became the channel that exposed her. That is usually how it goes. If you wait, I want to bring it back to my kitchen, because that is where it ended. For me, June graduated that spring. She finished her paralegal program with honors, and at the little ceremony she walked across the stage and found me afterward in the parking lot, and she did not say anything clever or final. She just hugged me and said, "We kept the records. We had. The banker's box is still in my closet. I do not need it anymore, but I cannot make myself throw it out, because it is 2 years of Sunday nights, and it is the last thing her mother taught us both. In a way, even from the shoebox. The flag is still up. I never took it down. Not for a day. Not for the fines. Not for the placard. Not for the man with the badge from the internet. It still stands at the end of the drive, where Diane wanted it, 3 degrees of plum that I reset on a Saturday with her watching. And the wind still comes down off the ridge clean and takes it out straight in the mornings. Some mornings I take my coffee out and stand under it, and do not think about Brenda Coyle at all, which is its own kind of victory, the quiet kind. So here is what I want you to take from this. Plainly, because I promised you a lesson, and a man should keep his promises. If you own your land, get the deed, the certified copy, from the recorder. Get the recorded plat of any subdivision near you, and find your own boundary on it with your finger. Know where your line is, on paper and on the ground, before anyone ever knocks on your door. If a letter comes, do not argue and do not panic. Start a folder. Write the date on the outside. Put everything in it, every notice, every photograph, every call, and date. All of it. When somebody makes a claim, make them put it in writing and save what they wrote. Be polite, be quiet, and be correct. because the loudest person in the room is almost always the one with the weakest paper, and a calm man with a clean file beats a clipboard every single time. You do not have to win the argument on the driveway. You only have to keep the record and let them walk into a courtroom and hand the judge the very thing that ends them. If this happened to you, or it is happening now, tell me about it in the comments. I read them. If this kind of story is one you want more of, subscribe, and you will get them. And next time I am going to tell you about the woman 3 counties over who was told she could not park her own truck on her own gravel until she pulled out the easement her grandfather recorded in 1951 and the whole road changed hands. Keep your deed. Keep your folder. I will see you next time.